The usher barely glanced at my invitation before pointing toward the very last row of folding chairs. "Back there," she said dismissively, her manicured finger indicating the metal seats that had been hastily arranged behind the official seating area. The slight was intentional, calculated, and perfectly executed. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." I clutched my son Marcus's graduation invitation tighter, the embossed lettering reading, "Prestigious Whitmore Academy Commencement Ceremony," feeling like mockery in my hands. Around me, other parents, the right kind of parents, were being escorted to plush reserved seating near the front, their designer handbags and tailored suits marking them as members of the inner circle I'd apparently been excluded from. "Excuse me," I said quietly to the usher, a blonde woman in her 30s whose smile never reached her eyes. "I think there might be a mistake. My son Marcus Williams is the valedictorian." Her smile grew more condescending. "I'm sure you're very proud," she replied, not bothering to check her clipboard. "But seating arrangements are final. The back rows are for scholarship families." The words hit like a slap. Scholarship families. As if poverty was contagious, as if our presence might somehow diminish the accomplishments of their precious legacy students. I wanted to tell her that Marcus had earned his place here through pure brilliance, that his 4.0 GPA and perfect SAT scores had nothing to do with charity. Instead, I nodded and made my way to the designated area for the undesirables. The metal chair was uncomfortable, placed so far from the stage that I'd need binoculars to see my son's face clearly. Around me sat other parents who bore the telltale signs of financial struggle: carefully mended clothing, older handbags, the quiet dignity of people who'd sacrificed everything for their children's education. We were the unwanted audience. The reminder that merit sometimes trumped money. I pulled out my phone and adjusted the camera settings, determined to capture every moment of Marcus's speech despite the distance. 3 years of watching him excel at this school, 3 years of parent conferences where teachers praised his exceptional abilities, and this was how they treated his family on his most important day. From my distant vantage point, I watched the front rows fill with the Academy's elite, board members, major donors, and families whose last names adorned buildings on campus. They air-kissed and exchanged pleasantries while servers offered them champagne and canapés. We in the back rows got nothing but the privilege of witnessing their exclusivity. Mrs. Catherine Ashworth, the Academy's most prominent donor and mother of Marcus's classmate Trevor, held court in the front row. Her diamond earrings caught the morning light as she gestured dramatically, no doubt regaling her companions with stories of her latest charity gala or European vacation. I'd met her once at a school function, where she'd looked through me as if I were invisible. Despite Marcus consistently outperforming her son in every subject, the ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance. I watched through my phone screen as Marcus took his place among the honor students, his cap slightly askew in the way I'd tried to fix 100 times that morning. My heart swelled with pride despite the circumstances. This brilliant young man, who'd overcome every obstacle placed before him, was about to address an audience that had already decided his family wasn't worthy of front-row treatment. Headmaster Pemberton approached the podium, his silver hair gleaming and his smile practiced from years of addressing wealthy donors. "Distinguished guests, esteemed faculty, proud families," he began, his eyes scanning the front rows with obvious preference. "Today we celebrate not just academic achievement, but the continuation of Whitmore Academy's proud tradition of excellence." I listened as he droned on about the school's prestigious history, its notable alumni, and its commitment to nurturing the leaders of tomorrow. Not once did he mention the scholarship students who'd brought actual intellectual diversity to his hallowed halls. Not once did he acknowledge that some of the brightest minds in this graduating class came from families who worked 2 jobs to afford the uniforms. When Marcus's name was finally called as valedictorian, I stood and cheered from my assigned place. In the cheap seats, my voice carrying across the manicured lawn despite the distance. Several heads in the front rows turned to identify the source of such enthusiastic applause, their expressions ranging from mild annoyance to outright disdain. Marcus approached the podium with the quiet confidence I'd instilled in him from childhood. His speech was brilliant, a perfect blend of gratitude, wisdom, and subtle challenge to his audience to use their privileges responsibly. He spoke about breaking barriers, about proving that excellence knows no economic boundaries, about the responsibility of the educated to lift others up. I watched the faces in the front rows as his words landed. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their plush chairs as my son's eloquence forced them to confront their own prejudices. Others smiled politely while clearly planning their post-ceremony conversations that would undoubtedly minimize his achievements. Mrs. Ashworth's face was particularly telling. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the slight frown that crossed her features when Marcus spoke about merit trumping privilege. I wondered if she was thinking about all the times Trevor had come home complaining about being overshadowed by that scholarship kid. As Marcus concluded his speech to thunderous applause, most of it coming from the back rows where parents like me understood the magnitude of his achievement, I felt a complex mix of pride and anger. Proud of my son's brilliance and grace under pressure. Angry at a system that celebrated his mind while segregating his family. The individual diploma presentations began, and I prepared my phone to capture Marcus's moment. Despite everything, nothing could diminish the significance of this day. He'd earned his place at the top of this class through relentless dedication and natural brilliance. No amount of social exclusion could change that fact, but as I sat in my designated place among the scholarship families, watching the elaborate ceremony unfold for the benefit of the wealthy and well-connected, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another reminder of how the world saw people like us. Useful when our children's achievements reflected well on their institution, invisible when it came to actual inclusion. The afternoon sun was growing warm, and several parents around me were fanning themselves with their programs. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were literally left in the heat while the front rows enjoyed strategically placed shade tents. Even the weather seemed to conspire in our marginalization. I thought about all the nights I'd worked double shifts at the hospital to afford Marcus's books and supplies. About the times I'd skipped meals to pay for his academic competition fees. About the parent conferences where I'd sat alone while other families brought both parents, sometimes grandparents, to celebrate their children's lesser achievements. None of it mattered now. In a few hours, Marcus would graduate summa cum laude from one of the most prestigious prep schools in the country. Harvard awaited him in the fall, a full scholarship ensuring that his brilliance would continue to open doors regardless of our economic status, but the sting of this morning's treatment lingered. The casual dismissal, the automatic assignment to the inferior seating, the assumption that we somehow deserved less consideration, it all reinforced the barriers that Marcus had spent 3 years breaking down with his exceptional performance. As the ceremony continued, I noticed a small commotion near the stage. Several faculty members were whispering urgently to each other, checking their phones and looking toward the parking lot with expressions of surprise. Whatever was happening, it was clearly unexpected and significant enough to distract them from the proceedings. Mrs. Ashworth had noticed too, craning her neck to see what was causing the disturbance. Her perfectly coiffed head tilted as she tried to eavesdrop on the faculty conversations, her social radar clearly detecting something important happening beyond the ceremony. The whispers were spreading through the front rows now, creating an undercurrent of excitement and speculation. I could see parents checking their own phones, some with expressions of shock, others with dawning recognition. Whatever news was circulating, it was significant enough to momentarily overshadow the graduation ceremony itself. From my position in the back, I couldn't hear the specifics of their hushed conversations, but the body language was unmistakable. Something unexpected was happening, something that was causing the Academy's most prominent figures to reassess whatever assumptions they'd brought to this ceremony. I focused my attention back on Marcus, who had returned to his seat among the honor students but kept glancing toward the faculty area with curiosity. He'd always been perceptive, able to read social dynamics with the same analytical skills he applied to his academic work. Even from the stage, he could sense the shift in atmosphere. The diploma presentations continued, each name called with appropriate fanfare, each family celebrating their graduate's achievement. But the undercurrent of whispered conversations and checking phones continued, creating an atmosphere of anticipation that seemed separate from the ceremony itself. As Marcus's row was finally called to receive their diplomas, I stood once again, my phone ready to capture the moment when all his hard work would be officially recognized. Whatever drama was unfolding in the front rows, nothing could diminish the significance of watching my son walk across that stage. But as I raised my phone to record his approach to the podium, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. Headmaster Pemberton was looking directly at me, his expression completely changed from the dismissive politeness he'd shown throughout the ceremony. The whispered conversations had reached him too, and whatever he'd learned was causing him to see the back rows, to see me, with entirely new eyes. The moment was approaching when Marcus would receive his diploma and deliver his final remarks as valedictorian. But something told me that this ceremony was about to take a turn that none of us, especially not Mrs. Ashworth and her front row companions, had anticipated. As Marcus approached the podium to receive his diploma, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the academy lawn, and I couldn't help but feel that those shadows were about to shift in ways that would illuminate truths that had been carefully hidden for far too long. Marcus reached for his diploma, his smile radiant as Headmaster Pemberton shook his hand with unusual deference. But instead of the brief congratulatory exchange typical of these ceremonies, Pemberton held on to the handshake longer than necessary, his eyes darting nervously toward the faculty huddle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pemberton announced, his voice carrying an odd tremor, "before we conclude today's ceremony, I have an unexpected announcement that will require a brief pause in our proceedings." The murmur from the front rows grew louder. Mrs. Ashworth had abandoned all pretense of polite attention, openly craning her neck and whispering urgently to her companions. Several board members were now standing, checking their phones with expressions of barely contained panic. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Academy's Dean of Academics, approached the podium carrying what appeared to be an official letter. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she whispered something to Pemberton. The color drained from his face as he read whatever she'd handed him. From my back row vantage point, I watched the drama unfold with growing curiosity. Marcus remained on stage, diploma in hand, clearly as confused as everyone else about the sudden disruption to what should have been a straightforward ceremony. "It appears," Pemberton said, his voice now barely concealing his nervousness, "that we have a very distinguished guest among us today. Someone whose presence we were unaware of until just moments ago." He paused, scanning the crowd with obvious desperation. His eyes swept past the front rows of dignitaries and donors, past the middle sections of faculty and staff families, and landed squarely on the back rows where I sat among the other scholarship families. "Dr. Victoria Williams," he called out, his voice carrying across the lawn with surprising clarity, "would you please join us on stage?" The silence that followed was deafening. Every head in the ceremony turned toward the back rows, hundreds of pairs of eyes searching for someone who clearly wasn't supposed to be sitting in the cheap seats. I felt my heart begin to race as the realization hit me. They were calling my name. Slowly, I stood from my uncomfortable metal chair, feeling the weight of every gaze in the assembly. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the crowd like wildfire. In the front rows, Mrs. Ashworth's perfectly composed face had transformed into a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "That's impossible," I heard someone whisper as I began walking toward the stage. "Dr. Williams is supposed to be the new chancellor of the state university system," Pemberton finished, his voice now carrying clearly across the silent lawn, "who apparently chose to attend her son's graduation ceremony incognito." The gasps that followed were audible even from my position halfway to the stage. I could see the exact moment when recognition dawned on face after face in the front rows. The woman they'd dismissed as just another scholarship parent, relegated to the back row like an unwanted afterthought, was actually one of the most powerful figures in higher education. As I walked up the steps to the stage, Marcus's face broke into a grin of pure delight. He'd known this day would come eventually, but even he hadn't expected it to unfold quite like this. We'd agreed to keep my new appointment quiet until after his graduation, wanting him to finish his time at Whitmore without the complications that would come with everyone knowing his mother was about to become the youngest chancellor in the university system's history. "Dr. Williams," Pemberton said as I reached the podium, his tone now obsequiously respectful, "we had no idea you would be honoring us with your presence today." "If we had known, you would have what?" I interrupted, my voice calm but carrying clearly across the now silent assembly. "Treated my family with the basic respect that every parent deserves at their child's graduation? Or simply found a more subtle way to make us feel unwelcome?" The silence stretched uncomfortably as my words settled over the crowd. In the front rows, I could see board members frantically whispering to each other, probably calculating the potential damage of having humiliated the person who would soon control their accreditation and state funding. Mrs. Ashworth looked like she might faint. The woman who had dismissed me at every school function, who had made snide comments about scholarship families within my earshot, who had spent 3 years treating my brilliant son as an unwelcome intrusion into her elite social circle, was now staring at me with the expression of someone watching her worst nightmare come to life. Perhaps, I continued, accepting the microphone that Dean Chen hastily offered, this is an appropriate moment to discuss the values we're really teaching our children here at Whitmore Academy. I turned to address the full assembly, my eyes deliberately sweeping from the uncomfortable front rows to my fellow parents in the back. 3 years ago, when my son Marcus first arrived at this school, I was told by several people that he would need to know his place. That academic excellence was wonderful, but social hierarchy was immutable. The discomfort in the front rows was now palpable. Several parents were openly fidgeting, no doubt remembering their own contributions to the casual classism that had defined their interactions with families like mine. I was seated in the back row today not because of any mistake or oversight, but because someone decided that the mother of your valedictorian, a young man who has outperformed every student in his class, somehow deserved less consideration than donors and board members. Marcus stood beside me, his diploma still in hand, watching with obvious pride as I finally addressed the elephant that had been in every room during his time at Whitmore. As the incoming chancellor of the state university system, I continued, I oversee the institutions that will welcome many of your graduates next year. I evaluate the quality of preparation that high schools like Whitmore provide to their students. And I must say, I'm deeply concerned about what kind of preparation you're providing. The panic in Pemberton's eyes was now unmistakable. The state university system represented the largest pipeline for Whitmore graduates, and my evaluation of their academic standards would directly impact their reputation and enrollment. Academic excellence paired with social discrimination is not education, it's indoctrination into systems of inequality that our society can no longer afford to perpetuate. I paused, letting that statement settle before continuing. However, I've also witnessed something else during my son's time here. I've seen teachers who recognized brilliance regardless of its economic packaging. I've watched classmates who celebrated Marcus's achievements without regard to his family's financial status. I've observed administrators who, when pressed, consistently supported merit over privilege. The relief that flickered across several faces told me my words were hitting their mark. The question moving forward is whether Whitmore Academy wants to be remembered as an institution that perpetuated social barriers, or as one that broke them down. Whether you want to be known for protecting privilege or for nurturing genuine excellence regardless of its origin. Mrs. Ashworth had gone completely white. I could see her frantically calculating the social and professional implications of her treatment of my family. Her husband sat on the board of 2 major corporations that regularly partnered with state universities. Her charity work depended heavily on state funding and university partnerships. Her entire social standing was built on connections that I would now influence in my new role. I want to be clear, I said, my voice warming as I looked out at the parents in the back rows, that nothing about today changes the validity of what we've all accomplished. Our children earned their places here through merit. They've excelled despite being treated as second-class citizens by some members of this community. Their achievements are not diminished by anyone's prejudices. The applause that started in the back rows was immediately picked up by the middle sections and, after a moment's hesitation, grudgingly joined by some in the front. Marcus beamed beside me, his pride evident not just in his academic achievements, but in watching his mother finally address the treatment we'd endured with quiet dignity for 3 years. As Chancellor, I continued as the applause died down, I'll be implementing new partnerships between the university system and secondary schools. These partnerships will focus not just on academic preparation, but on ensuring that educational institutions model the inclusive excellence our society needs. The implications were clear to everyone present. Whitmore's relationship with the state university system, their students' primary destination, would now depend on more than just academic standards. Their institutional culture would be under scrutiny from someone who had experienced their discrimination firsthand. I want to thank Headmaster Pemberton and the faculty for providing my son with an exceptional education, I said, turning to acknowledge them directly. Marcus is academic. Success here speaks to the quality of instruction and the high standards you maintain. That excellence should be paired with equally high standards for how we treat every member of our community. Pemberton nodded eagerly, clearly relieved that my criticism had been constructive rather than destructive. Several faculty members were actually smiling, probably thinking about the positive changes that would come from having someone with real power finally address the social dynamics they'd observed but been powerless to change. Now, I said, stepping back and gesturing to Marcus, I believe we have a ceremony to complete. My son has earned the right to conclude his remarks as valedictorian, and I wouldn't want to keep these distinguished guests from their post-ceremony reception any longer than necessary. Marcus approached the microphone with a grin that suggested he had a few thoughts of his own to share. Thank you, Chancellor Williams, he said, emphasizing my new title with obvious pride. And thank you to everyone who made my time at Whitmore so educational. The subtle emphasis on that last word drew chuckles from students and back row parents who understood exactly what kind of education he was referencing. When I first arrived here 3 years ago, Marcus continued, I thought success would be measured purely by academic achievement. I've learned that true success requires something more: the courage to excel despite opposition, the grace to remain kind when others are cruel, and the wisdom to use whatever platform you earn to lift others up. He looked directly at Mrs. Ashworth and her circle as he spoke about courage in the face of opposition. Several students in the graduating class were nodding vigorously, clearly relating to his experience as an outsider who had proven himself through performance rather than pedigree. I'm proud to be the son of Dr. Victoria Williams, not because of her new title, but because she taught me that excellence speaks for itself. She showed me that dignity is maintained not by demanding respect, but by earning it through consistent character and achievement. The final applause was thunderous, led enthusiastically by the back rows and joined with varying degrees of enthusiasm by the rest of the assembly. As the ceremony concluded and families began moving toward the reception area, I watched the social dynamics shift in real time. Parents who had barely acknowledged me for 3 years were suddenly appearing at my elbow, eager to congratulate me on my appointment and express their admiration for Marcus's achievements. Board members who had been content to let me sit in the back row were now frantically trying to engage me in conversations about potential university partnerships. Mrs. Ashworth approached with obvious reluctance, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the stress of the afternoon's revelations. Dr. Williams, she said, her voice strained, I had no idea about your background. If I had known, you would have treated my family differently. I interrupted gently. That's exactly the problem, Mrs. Ashworth. Basic human decency shouldn't depend on someone's resume or connections. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, clearly recognizing that anything she said would only make her position worse. Her husband appeared behind her, his own face pale as he contemplated the professional implications of his wife's behavior toward the new chancellor. However, I continued, I believe in the power of education to change perspectives. Perhaps this experience will help all of us think more carefully about how we treat people when we think their status can't affect us. The relief in her eyes was palpable. I wasn't going to destroy her socially or professionally, but the lesson had been delivered with unmistakable clarity. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself surrounded by genuine well-wishers alongside the newly deferential opportunists. Former classmates of Marcus approached to congratulate him and express their excitement about following him to various universities in the fall. Teachers who had supported him throughout his time at Whitmore beamed with pride at seeing their faith in his potential vindicated, but the most satisfying moment came as I was preparing to leave. The parents from the back rows, the other scholarship families, gathered around me not to curry favor because of my new position, but to celebrate the vindication we'd all experienced. Thank you, said Maria Santos, whose daughter had graduated third in the class despite facing similar social barriers. Not just for what you said today, but for showing our kids that excellence eventually wins. Standing there surrounded by families who had earned their place through merit rather than inheritance, watching their children prepare for bright futures at top universities, I felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice finally being served. Marcus appeared beside me, diploma in hand and genuine happiness radiating from his face. "So," he said with a grin, "how was the view from the back row?" I looked out at the dispersing crowd, the chastened elite, the vindicated outsiders, the faculty and administrators who were already discussing policy changes that would prevent future discrimination, and smiled. "Educational," I replied, using his earlier emphasis. "Very educational indeed." As we walked toward our car, I noticed Headmaster Pemberton updating the seating chart for next year's ceremony. Something told me that scholarship families would be finding themselves in much better seats moving forward. After all, the best revenge isn't just about revealing the truth, it's about ensuring the system changes so others don't have to endure what you did. And sometimes, the most powerful position from which to create that change is one that nobody saw coming. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.